In a dusty storage vault beneath a Turkish university, a carved stone tablet sat boxed and unlabeled for 11 years. To the archivist who walked past it, it was administrative backlog. But to the archaeologist who finally opened that crate, it was a date 3,400 years older than anything it had any right to be. And it rewrote the starting line of human civilization entirely. Before we continue, comment where you are watching from, like and subscribe. Because that tablet doesn't just represent a misdated artifact. It represents something far more unsettling: the possibility that everything we thought we knew about when human civilization began is off. Not by decades, not by a century, but by thousands of years. And that brings us to something that nobody in mainstream archaeology wanted to ask for a very long time. What if the story of human history didn't start where we said it did? We have spent over a century building a timeline, teaching it in schools, printing it in textbooks, funding entire careers around it. The accepted sequence is clean: hunter-gatherers, then agriculture, then settlements, then writing, then civilization. A neat, linear march from primitive to complex. But what if that sequence is incomplete? What if the discovery that could have dismantled it was found labeled, photographed, recorded, and then quietly set aside because it didn't fit? That is exactly what happened, and the scientists who tried to raise the alarm were not proven wrong. They were simply ignored, until now, when the evidence has become too large and too precise to ignore any longer. To understand why this discovery is so destabilizing, you have to understand what it is challenging. Not just a theory, not just an academic paper, the entire foundational chronology of human civilization. The accepted timeline places the earliest complex human settlements at roughly 10,000 to 12,000 years ago in the Fertile Crescent, in what is now modern Iraq and Syria. That is the number in the textbooks. That is the number repeated in every documentary, every museum exhibit, every university lecture on the origins of humanity. At its peak, this consensus represented the combined conclusions of more than 150 years of excavation across thousands of sites on 6 continents, over 40,000 artifacts cataloged, careers built across generations. The framework was not constructed carelessly. It was constructed from the largest coordinated archaeological effort in human history. For nearly a century, it stood as the most rigorously tested origin story science had ever produced. Which is precisely what makes the anomalies so difficult to dismiss. Because when evidence doesn't fit a framework, that's solid evidence that has now been dated, verified, and cross-referenced by independent laboratories on 3 separate continents, something fundamental has to give. For generations, the accepted explanation went like this. Humans spent the vast majority of their existence as nomadic hunter-gatherers, small, mobile bands following food across landscapes, leaving almost nothing behind. Then, approximately 10,000 to 12,000 years ago, something shifted. The climate stabilized after the last ice age. Plants became predictable. Animals became manageable. And for the first time, humans stopped moving and started building. From that moment, the sequence was considered settled: agriculture first, then permanent settlements, then population growth, then the specialization of labor, then writing, then governance, then civilization as we recognize it, each stage dependent on the one before it, each stage arriving in order. The logic seemed airtight. You cannot have cities without food surplus. You cannot have writing without cities. You cannot have organized society without writing. The whole structure held together because each piece required the piece beneath it. And for decades, every major dig seemed to confirm it. The evidence pointed the same direction. Researchers built careers on it. Institutions funded it. Governments preserved sites based on it. But to anyone who understands how civilizations actually collapse and resurface in the archaeological record, this explanation has always had one immediate, fundamental problem. The timeline assumes absence of evidence is evidence of absence. The simplest question is the one nobody seems to answer completely. If complex civilization only emerged 10,000 to 12,000 years ago, if that is genuinely where the sequence begins, then why do we keep finding things that are older? Not older by a little, older by a margin that cannot be explained away as contamination, misdating, or isolated anomaly. Göbekli Tepe in southeastern Turkey was completed, not started, completed approximately 11,600 years ago. It contains megalithic pillars standing 5.5 meters tall, weighing up to 10 metric tons each, carved with sophisticated iconography, arranged in precise circular enclosures. The official explanation handles the stonework. It handles the scale. But here is what it cannot explain. The people who built it were not supposed to have been capable of organized, coordinated, large-scale construction yet. According to the accepted timeline, they were still nomadic, still pre-agricultural, still, by definition, pre-civilizational. You do not organize thousands of labor hours, transport 10-ton stones, and execute geometrically precise construction without hierarchy, without planning, without language sophisticated enough to coordinate it all. The accepted story says civilization produced those capabilities. Göbekli Tepe was built before civilization was supposed to exist. That is not a footnote. That is a fracture running straight through the foundation. And Göbekli Tepe is not alone. A 2021 analysis of underwater sediment cores off the coast of Chennai, India, retrieved structural debris, fired brick, worked stone, and ceramic fragments from 36 meters below current sea level. Independent radiocarbon dating placed the material at approximately 11,000 years old. At that depth, the site was only above water during the last glacial maximum, and the debris wasn't scattered. It was stratified, layered in the way only deliberate, sustained occupation produces. That is not normal. That is not explainable by flooding or displacement. A 2019 study in the Journal of Archaeological Science analyzed 58 copper artifacts from the Great Lakes region. The results showed smelting signatures dating to 8,700 years ago. Sophisticated metallurgy, in a region where the accepted timeline places only early hunter-gatherer activity at that period. Each finding was published. Each was peer-reviewed. Each was then absorbed into the literature and quietly surrounded by qualifications until it stopped being inconvenient. The evidence was never hidden. It was noted, filed, and left largely unaddressed, because addressing it directly would require dismantling the sequence the entire field is organized around. The answer did not come from a new excavation. It did not come from a more powerful dating technique or a bigger budget or a bolder archaeologist. It came from the sea floor. In 2002, marine geologist Glenn Milne published a comprehensive mapping of global coastline positions during the last glacial maximum approximately 20,000 to 7,000 years ago. What his models revealed was this. At peak glaciation, sea levels sat roughly 120 meters lower than they do today, which means the landmass available to human populations was dramatically larger. Coastal plains that are now submerged beneath the Atlantic, the Indian Ocean, and the South China Sea were once inhabited territory, flat, fertile, and ideal for settlement. We did not find the evidence of early civilization because we were not looking in the right place. We were excavating land. The cities were underwater. The timeline was never wrong because humans weren't advanced enough. It was wrong because the archaeological record we built it from was always incomplete. We were reconstructing human history from the portion of the earth that stayed above water, roughly 25% of what was once livable land. The absence of evidence was never evidence of absence. It was evidence of rising seas. What this discovery ultimately reveals is not just a problem with archaeological methodology. It reveals something far more uncomfortable about the nature of human knowledge itself. We did not build the accepted timeline from complete evidence. We built it from available evidence. And then critically, we mistook availability for completeness. We looked at what we could reach, cataloged what we could find, and drew a boundary around it called history. Everything outside that boundary we called prehistory, primitive, pre-civilizational. We filled the gap with assumptions about what early humans must have been like because the physical record, submerged beneath 120 meters of ocean, was not there to contradict us. Early civilization was not a late development. It was not a gift delivered to one region at one specific moment in time. It was a process longer, broader, and more geographically distributed than the textbooks have ever reflected. And the real question was never when did humans become capable of civilization. Humans were always capable. The real question is how much of what they built are we still walking above without knowing what lies beneath. The bricks didn't disappear. The ocean simply moved in. We didn't lose our origins. We submerged them. And somewhere beneath 120 meters of ocean, the full story of what humans built and when is still waiting to be read. If you want to follow this trail further, the next piece covers the specific underwater sites now being mapped by marine archaeologists, and what they are finding changes everything again. Thanks for watching. Please like, comments, and subscribe.